another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. This is your first time tuning into the show. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, the proverbial pops are now being heard down in El Segundo as week one of the pads for Chargers training camp comes on. Week two of training camp in total, 2 days in as it relates to the pads. That's what everybody's been waiting for. Somebody hit somebody. That's what everybody's been wanting to see. It's like, let's get to the real football. That's what everybody's been clamoring for. So in the midst of training camp, Dan and I are going to recap, obviously, what took place on day one with the pads. We're also going to talk about what we saw when we ourselves were down at training camp over the weekend. The atmosphere was, no pun intended, absolutely electric out there. You could just feel a different vibe. I know we've talked about it, Dan, on the podcast in general, just the aura that Jim Harbaugh brings and what this team has shaped up to look like. But when you're actually out there on the field to see everything going in motion, it doesn't compare. It really doesn't. So we're going to get into a lot today, but obviously Dan Wolkenstein, first and foremost. Sir, how are you?
I am good. This was such a fun weekend. So many Chargers fans. Bolt fan was out there in full tilt. Got to see a ton of them. Thank you to everybody who came up, said hi, whether it was at the training camp, whether it was in the lines, whether it was at random bars and breweries, or whether it was at the party afterwards at Rock and Brew. Shout out to Die Hard Bolt Club, by the way. They put on a tremendous event. Yes. And there was a bunch of people there. I think there was like 170 strong just at that one alone. A lot of takeaways, though. But before we do that, Jake, let's pay the bills. Let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline.
Want to remind everybody that BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right up to the top fights of the UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on the game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our 150 available slot games. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag to get in on the action. Just make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit for up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here.
People are really excited to see Joe Alt versus Bosa and Mac. Excited to see how Trey Pipkins does. Zion Johnson, the offensive line. How's the defensive line going to do? How's this receiving core going to look with pads on? We'll talk about the drop and some of the catches that we've seen from some of these players. Lots to discuss, but I think we probably should start it, Jake, with, this is a new era. We've talked about it for months at this point. And Joe Alt, pick number 5. This was a big day, I think, for Chargers fans. We were all seeing highlights of other players selected in other teams. And Joe Alt, new era, Jim Harbaugh selection through and through. Day one with pads. I can't think of a defensive line that would be harder to go up against. Like, talk about trial by fire. Going up against one Hall of Famer for sure. Joey Bosa, we'll see. Thule up and coming. Bud Dupree. I mean, if you can hold your own against those 4 combined collectively throughout camp, then you're doing just fine. But he was tested early and tested often, held his own, but also going up against some of these all-pro players, you're going to lose some too. Jake, let's talk about the offensive line now. Clanking pads, but Joe Alt first.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that in terms of like trial by fire and just being thrown to the wolves immediately, given what this Chargers edge group has. As you were saying that, I was thinking back to when Rashawn Slater was drafted and everybody was waiting for that first matchup between him and Joey Bosa. And then I think now I'm like, God, Joe Alt got the short end of the stick, because in Rashawn Slater's rookie year, he only had to go up against Joey Bosa. He didn't have Khalil Mack to contend with. He didn't have Thule. He didn't have Bud Dupree. Now he has to have a combination of every one of these guys. And as Khalil Mack had said in the press conference on Saturday night, it was mentioned that Joey Bosa was looking forward to putting a helmet right in the middle of Joe Alt's pads when the pads came on during the first practice. And that's sure enough what he did. And Joe Alt did get beat by Joey Bosa on one of these pass rush moves, got pushed back a little bit on some others. But overall, ended up holding his own very, very well.
Yeah, and I think there were some scares for Chargers fans. We all heard the press conference where Daniel Popper pushed. We were actually at that press conference, by the way, when Daniel Popper pushed Jim Harbaugh on the Rashawn Slater quote unquote injury and seeing if something was happening and he's quote unquote going through something. All of that, fast forward, Jim Harbaugh comes out and has a written disclaimer now. From now on, it's going to have his canned message, which is hilarious. But you saw Rashawn Slater the next day, day one in pads, out there going up against the ones. And, you know, Rashawn Slater is just an absolute beast. And you see him and Mac just feel like two grizzly bears, two massive grizzly bears going up against each other. And essentially a stalemate, which I think is a great thing.
It is.
These two players are so good. And they feel very similar in their respective positions, the way they play. And to have Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt being your two tackles is such a benefit and will pay back in spades for years. Justin Herbert's a happy camper.
Yeah, indeed. And what I saw from the offensive line in general over the weekend, because obviously Rashawn Slater wasn't out there on Saturday, there was a nice rotation that Mike Devlin and Nick Hardwick were moving around. So obviously with Rashawn out, you had Joe Alt kick back to left tackle. Trey Pipkins went to right tackle. Jamari Sawyer came in at right guard. Zion was in at left guard, and you had Bradley Bozeman in at center. That was your proverbial starting line for Saturday. And the one thing that I saw Mike Devlin just really preaching up close and personal was tempo, getting to the second level, pad level, where everybody needs to be, as Dan's showing some of these clips right now. They went through a multitude of different drills. What I loved about it, Dan, was they had them, when they started doing their combination block drills, and just in general, their mixture of their offensive line as they were going through them, it reminded me a lot of what Steve Clinkscale said in terms of, we want these guys to be able to know how to play every position possible. We want them to be versatile. We want them to be prepared should the worst happen. And so Alt and Zion were in on combo block drills. That was just absolutely magic. I'll have a lot to say about Zion Johnson in this podcast. But he is showing so much power in his blocking and quick to where he needs to be. And whether it was Alt that was coming off on a double block with Zion, or Zion next to the center, or if they moved Zion to Trey's side and they kept mixing up combinations, Zion was just the dude that was starting. He was the standout of the pair every single time that was coming out there. So he was getting a lot of praise from Mike Devlin. There was a lot of one-on-one praise that Nick Hardwick was giving to him, just being on the side, and they were just going over some, handwork maneuvers. But I know that this came through yesterday in padded practice as well. Zion Johnson, again, another body by Ben Herbert extraordinaire. The power is there. The speed is there. Not only does he look like a different person physically, but how he's moving out there on the drills, it just looks like he's getting it now. And it's breaking into that level that we've been wanting to see from him.
Yeah, and I give you credit because you noticed this immediately when we were on the field together during camp. I think it was Saturday. You came up to me midway through and you're like, man, Zion just looks different. He is so fast. And you're kind of telling me some of these stories. And then you fast forward to day one and he looks like a different person. And I coined it Z Unit, not G Unit. He is Z Unit.
Like that.
And anyone who sees this man in person, he looks like a walking tank. Just a brick house. And if the Chargers can get a leveled up Zion Johnson, along with an improved center, again, talking not Corey Linsley, but what they had previously when Corey Linsley was out versus the improved Bradley Bozeman, and they can get a right tackle in right tackle in Joe Alt, and then the right guard can be improved with Trey Pipkins, who looked good as well during day one. The opportunities and the benefits are endless. And so I think for me, the biggest story of camp so far in terms of what's going to matter in terms of getting wins is going to be the offensive line looks worlds different than it has years past. And that pays dividends in the run game, in the pass game, in pass protection, and protecting the franchise and that rocket arm and legs that they have. Defensive line, Jake, I think is a good one too, because again, trenches, this is where things start to add up. And Jake, you had a question mark for weeks now about kind of the interior of the defensive line and how they're going to look. Anything you saw from practice the last couple of days for the interior guys or takeaways from day one of pads?
You know, Gerard, I mean, when they started going in on their on-field drills, Gerard Clark had gotten in there on a sack when they were doing their defensive drills. Obviously, just their one-on-ones, working on their swim moves. Chris Rump had a nice little piece of humor on the day when they were doing some of their individual drills, because here's the setup. They're basically were getting coached to not only do their swim move past who they were, the pseudo offensive lineman, but this should be news for Chargers fans, to get your hands up and bat down some balls is what they were also having them do. So that was a nice thing to see.
And you saw Puna Ford in day one, by the way. Puna Ford there's a picture. Yes. If you go look at Chargers photos, he's up there doing it.
I thought it was appropriate that the person who essentially is being the pseudo offensive lineman for the other defenders to get past was Gerard Clark, because he's just a mountain of a human being. And it's like, if you're going to have someone go really wide to get around somebody, I guess that's the guy that you put out there to do it. So that was appropriately enough. Chris Rump decided to have some humor in some of those drills by swimming move in a certain spot that got a nice group of laughs going among the group. And even Morgan Fox was still laughing about it, I think, another 3 reps later. So that was good. But all in all, Dan, the interior of the defensive line, it's still going to be interesting because Puna Ford's size, it's funny. When you actually see him walking around, we all know how tall Puna Ford is, or not tall he is, or however you want to phrase it. But Puna Ford is just a low-built human being. And in any other world should probably not be a football player, but he is. And he actually plays it well because he stays low to the ground, and that's how he wins. And when he's out there, and most likely what you're thinking in terms of your eventual starters that are going to end up coming up from this group, Puna Ford, Morgan Fox on the interior, Scott Matlock is going to get a good rotation in there, which he and Zion had a lot of good one-on-one battles yesterday that Zion absolutely worked him over on. And then you think of Justin Ebogbe and Tito and the rest of these guys. How is it going to pan out? Because especially, Dan, when you look at the starting reps for the guys that aren't named Puna Ford or aren't named Morgan Fox, there's a reason to question it. But everything that we have found out, obviously, from Jesse Minter or Harbaugh's message is we're going to find ways to get after the quarterback. And whether that means that they're going to be disguising coverages for defensive linemen to do, as Trevor McHugh was talking about, because that's a lot of what Jesse Minter did in Michigan. Scott Matlock is definitely athletic enough to do that if he needs to. He did some of that in Boise State as well. Puna Ford, for as big as he is, he can still move. So I'll be interested to see how ultimately they're going to end up deploying this group. But really, your weapons are on the outside. Can you get another weapon inside? Because if you could start generating some interior pass rush and getting these hands up and getting these batted balls down, which have eluded the Chargers for years, that's a whole nother level to a defense that can be a game changer.
Yeah, one interesting note, and I think Chargers fans probably would appreciate this, is shout out to Eric Smith, by the way, who but every practice puts out a kind of a recap and his top 3 things. But he mentioned that for the 11-on-11 period, that it is live tackling inside the 10-yard line, but that rule only applies to the second and third team. So first team is kind of like a walkthrough, and apparently the quote was, it was a walkthrough for the ones. They're on different levels. Quote, the 2s and 3s have more plays coming in the preseason game a week from Saturday. So building up in phases. So again, allowing the players who have something to prove and roster spots up for grabs those are the ones who are going to get a run. Those are the ones who are getting live action, both in preseason as well as the ones in training camp. But I find it, which we'll continue to see this as it progresses, the different ways that this staff keeps these guys healthy, whether it's the times of the training camps, whether it's the duration of which these players are playing, whether it's which ones are going to be in for live action. You could tell the importance of health throughout. And so credit to Ben Herbert, to Jim Harbaugh, to the whole staff. There's a lot of attention, you could tell, being focused on this. And it's down to the details of who's getting run and live tackling in the red zone. I thought that was interesting. I thought it's important for Chargers fans to understand.
Yeah, Dan, and you mentioned the red zone drills, obviously, as it relates to how they break down the tackling, who's going to be going full bore. The defense still won as it related to the red zone drills yesterday, whether it was Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa doing it, even for the second and the third teams coming in on a sack and doing it. But the defense had a very good day as it related to red zone drills.
Yeah. So, I think Chargers fans, the trench game is going to be the strength of this team. And we would have loved to have said that for the last several years. Now that's the case. But that brings question marks to other position groups, one of which is the wide receiver room, which this is kind of a tale of two halves in terms of positive and negative. Negative a little bit. Positive. Quentin Johnston's improving. Quentin Johnston has done a lot in camp. Quentin Johnston is getting a good run, and Justin Herbert's targeting him a bit. Lad McConkey is an absolute freak, and the separation that guy gets instantaneously is remarkable. And you see that pop off the field immediately and is absolutely cooking anyone he's going up against. Anyone. Now, is that good McConkey or bad defender? It might be a little bit of both. I'm not sure. But I can tell you, Lad McConkey is absolutely feasting and gets it whenever he wants. Now, Quentin Johnston's improving, but there are still things Quentin Johnston is working on, and one of which is the deep ball. And, we talk about putting players in a position to succeed. By now, most of you have seen the drop, quote unquote, the drop, which looks almost and eerily identical to the drop that costed this Chargers team that loss in Green Bay last year. Quentin Johnston had a deep ball drop, perfect dime of a throw, drop in the bucket from Justin Herbert, clanks off of Quentin Johnston's hands with Christian Fulton in coverage. Christian Fulton didn't touch it. Quentin Johnston dropped it and brings up those ugly demons again about can he be relied upon in those gotta have it deep balls. And this is what I think is the important discussion is, Jake, in my opinion, when I saw this, first, I was kind of heartbroken for Quentin Johnston because you know how much this kid wants it. You saw afterwards him on the jug machine for minutes. You saw him doing that same kind of catch and drill afterwards for countless minutes, kind of going over and over and over and going over it. You know he wants it. We heard the staff, all of his teammates talk about it. But again, living in the realities here, until Quentin Johnston can show that he can do that, I'm not having Quentin Johnston do that in a time that matters. So understanding what you're good at and delegating the things that you're not, I think that's an important characteristic of a good football team. And so get Quentin Johnston up to speed on that stuff. But until he can do it well, that's why you have DJ Chark. That's why you have Lad McConkey. That's why you have Josh Palmer. They can do those things. So it's unfortunate. We all want to see this former first-round pick, second-year player ball out and everything. That might just be the thing right now that's his weakness. So I guess the question for you, Jake, is what are your thoughts on the drop, the importance, impact, and ramifications of it?
Obviously, the drop isn't good in any circumstance. And as much as people on social media want to talk about it and acknowledge it, and as much as we're going to acknowledge it, and for fair reason,
yeah,
nobody's kicking themselves any harder than Quentin Johnston right now. We heard him earlier this year be extremely humble and take a lot of responsibility for the downfalls that took place during his rookie season. And to your point, Dan, as you mentioned, if it was you that did that, or if it was anybody that did that, the first thing that I would be doing is going over to the jugging machine. I'd be doing something to get myself a little bit better at it, atoning for my mistake, trying to get better. Now, I get it, for being a first-round pick and having the same issues befall you what they were in regular season last year and already starting to creep up a little bit here in camp, even under a different coaching staff. It's not the best look. I'll say this much. When Dan talks about Quentin Johnston improving, these questions were asked of him specifically in the press conference that we were at on Saturday, because Daniel Popper kind of drilled in to say, like, hey, what are the specifics that Coach Sanjay Lal and you would have been going over in terms of what's been improving? And he would talk about his get off, his specifics in route running, where his weight distribution needs to be, when he needs to cut, where he needs to be. So I think in terms of those things, thus far, especially if you go back to the early days of practice last week,
or even the same day early on, he won
because he had Christian Fulton beat, well beat. So in terms of the route running, I think that's improving. I think his get off is improving. And in terms of just catching a ball as it relates for the biggest job for the wide receiver to do, I get it. That cloud is going to hang over him until he's able to prove it, as you said, Dan, when it counts. Now, I will retort with this, because you're saying I would not have him do that until he's absolutely ready, go to DJ Chark, do this, that, and the other.
In real game scenarios, when the bullets are flying. Yes.
I get it. In real game scenarios, I understand that. But what do we expect Quentin Johnston to do at this point? You either respond or you don't.
Yep.
So I'm sure he's going to have more of these opportunities in camp.
Should be today. I hope it's today.
I hope that he ends up on the better side of the proverbial ball this time.
If it's me, Jake, and I'm Harbaugh and I'm Sanjay Lal and company, whether it is during 11-on-11s or whether it's during some of the drills, I'm doing that drill. I'm doing that play. Both sides of the hashes with Quentin today. Get right back on the horse. There's no need to avoid it. Don't let it get bigger than it is. Go do it. Because we see it. I know Quentin Johnston sees it. You know the coaching staff sees it. So go. I think it's good to kind of just face it. But again, he had multiple catches that day. He had multiple good plays so far in camp. So, like, it isn't Quentin Johnston sucks, he can't catch the ball. Like, that's not it. Anybody who says that, like, it's just lazy. I think there are specific traits that Quentin Johnston needs to improve. The deep ball is one of them. And that's okay. People are looking for this to be, like, immediate. And I think it's in the shadow of the other receivers selected then, or other receivers that went this year, or the fact that the last year that he had wasn't great. I get all of that, but, like, let's let this play out a bit. And for those just excited to just crash on his parade and already kind of set him off in the sunset, like, it's just unfair. And you can acknowledge the downfalls, but also root for the person, root for the player, and acknowledge the things that they're improving. Now, the flip side to Quentin Johnston, we talk about reliability. And I mentioned it before, but Lad McConkey, Jake, you were there. Tell us about what you saw with Lad McConkey.
So, Dan, you and I were on opposite sides of the field. So closest to you was when he caught that amazing pass from Justin Herbert, crossbody through traffic and defenders and all the way in the back of the end zone. Just an unbelievable play. When they started going the other direction towards me, Lad McConkey had Jasir Taylor's number. I mean, he ate his lunch on 2 consecutive plays where he came across the field. And again, we talk about this relationship with Justin Herbert and Lad McConkey just continues to build every single day. The anticipation is there. He knows exactly where Ladd was going to cut, where he was going to be. He put the ball perfectly where it needed to be. And Ladd McConkey has 4 to 5 steps on Jasir Taylor as he's going across the field. It didn't even look like it was at the same type of speed as one is running with the other. And those were 2 consecutive plays. Herbert found number 1. It was a gain of 15 yards. Herbert went right back to him, and it was another gain of 10. And it was almost the same identical play. It was a cross route just from the opposite side of the field, but it was still Jasir Taylor that was covering him. And it just looked really good for Ladd McConkey, bad for the other guy, unfortunately. But yeah, this is seemingly what Ladd McConkey has been doing since he set foot on a field with Justin Herbert.
I think that is a excellent sign of a rookie, is when they make the hard stuff look easy. And I'll never forget, I was at the Chargers-Bills game in Carson, and it was at home. It was the Nathan Peterman game, if you remember that. It was like 5 or 6 interceptions.
Oh, yes.
And my buddy and I, he's a big Bills fan, and Keenan Allen is absolutely cooking that game. I think he had like 13 receptions for 160-something yards. It was insane. And my buddy, who's a Bills fan, he was irate at the Bills defense because Keenan Allen is always open. And I say this because my buddy screaming, Keenan Allen, he's always open in the slot. And he's pointing every time, and he's just getting peppered and peppered and peppered. I'm not saying Ladd McConkey is Keenan Allen, but in that same vein of he is always open, I have not seen him not open when he's targeted. It just seems easy for him. And so that's why he was selected. And I think that's the reliable. You're seeing rumors on social media about him already being wide receiver 1 and the camaraderie with him. And he's good. He's the truth. Like, he's the real deal. And so that dichotomy of ready year 1 out the gate and knowing what you are good at in Ladd McConkey, and the coaching staff knowing what you're good at, the dichotomy of that and Quentin Johnson, like, they're very different. Not to say Quentin Johnson's not going to be good, but in terms of pro ready, I mean, you heard Justin Herbert say it a couple weeks ago. He feels like he's been in the league for 4 or 5 years already. I really like the dynamic component that Ladd McConkey brings to this team, both in speed, but also probably more important, like short area quickness and ability to get open. He's that safety valve that he had in Keenan Allen for so long. And you mentioned it, man. It's just effortless. It's effortless. It's just ridiculous.
It's also a testament, I think, of this whole philosophy of what Harbaugh brings to the table actually working. Because not only do you have to give Ladd McConkey credit for this, and as you said, making the hard stuff look easy, but again, this has been talked about for Justin Herbert since March. Keenan Allen's not there. Mike Williams isn't there. Who's going to step up to take those targets? And seemingly since day 1, it's been Herbert and McConkey just getting that type of a relationship. We're talking
Charks look good too. I would say Charks looks good. Charks looked good.
Well, sure, but DJ Chark's a veteran.
Of course.
I'm simply just saying, from the standpoint of picking it up this quickly to gain this amount of trust with a quarterback that you don't know and a wide receiver that you don't know, and to seemingly have this be the pseudo Keenan Allen replacement this early into training camp. And as you said, the way he's doing it, Dan, I think it's a testament to Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey for building that relationship. I think Harbaugh and Greg Roman know that they want as much of that connection as they can get because they know how good it is. And they're going to continue to feed both of those guys on every opportunity possible. So to have that situation picked up right now, where it is in camp, is great. And that's just one receiver out of the 19 that the Chargers currently have on the roster right now. Justin Herbert's going to spread this ball around. And if it means that lad McConkey is going to be the one that's leading the way on it, I'm all for it.
Yep. Now, we don't just talk about receivers and line. We also got to give the special team some love. And Jake, I don't think I have seen a kicker that is this automatic than what we're seeing with Cameron Dicker. And I'll be honest, I'm out there at camp both days, and I personally didn't see him miss one. I didn't watch every single kick that he did. I didn't see him miss one. Somebody on social media told me that he hit one off the post. Otherwise, everything went in. I've seen him hit, from 35, 40, 45, from 50. And I start saying, oh, he hasn't missed yet. And I think in my head immediately, oh, I don't want to jinx him. Next kick, nailed it from 52. Someone says, oh, I don't want to jinx it. Nailed it from 55. And over and over and over and over and over and over. He was so automatic, and it just seemed easy. It wasn't even, he hit 155 plus, and it was just a walk in the park. And it was, it kind of, you think back to the Nate Kading days where he's automatic until it counted in the playoffs and they had that really gut-wrenching loss. We haven't seen Cameron Dicker make him in the playoffs. He hasn't been in the playoffs. But you got to think, I haven't seen him. You've seen big kicks during the season. He hasn't missed a beat. So all this to say, this Chargers team has an absolute weapon. And we've seen this Chargers team go up against teams with Harrison Butker or Justin Tucker, where as soon as it's like 55 and in, you're just like, well, lost that one. That's kind of how I'm getting vibes with Cameron Dicker as well. He's just really, really good.
First of all, I love the way that, because it wasn't just like, okay, field goal unit, you're going up there, you're just doing 4 or 5 kicks, Dan. They were doing it rotationally, where it was like a third down drill. They would call out how much time was left on the clock.
Like 18 seconds or
20
whatever,
seconds, yeah. 18 seconds. They would run whatever play it was, whether it was a run or a pass, however many yards you end up gaining, and then quickly transition to the special teams unit and have Dicker come out there and just boot one.
Over and over and over and over.
And Dan, just to correct you, because you were talking about in terms of him making it in the playoffs, he did play in that Jacksonville game that we won't forget, unfortunately. So he was 3 for 4, in case you need a refresher on that. But not only was Cameron Dicker,
I forgot about that. Was the fourth that he missed, was that the 50 plus, the 51?
I can't remember the distance. But if I remember correctly, that one was the one that came like right before halftime. And I think that was kind of what spurted everybody talking about, watch that one come back to bite him a little bit later, which of course it did. But not only was Cameron Dicker perfect automatic on Saturday, he almost got some additional GTA points, because I was almost the recipient of one of his kicks in my face. Jake Hefner was wrong place, wrong time. I was on the far side of the field where the field goal posts were. I was moving from one side to the other because I was watching the offense to my right, and I was going to go walk over to the left to start watching the defense. And the way that they had the walkways and for all of us to be, while the field goal unit is over here to the field. So I'm walking in between that. And then of course they have the net on this side to catch the ball. And I just didn't realize where I was at that particular point in time. And thank God for one of the Chargers team reps who were recovering the balls at that time. All I hear is heads up, heads up, heads up. And I just immediately just start ducking down and quickening my pace. I almost end up getting nailed by one of Cameron Dicker's field goals. So
I saw the whole thing.
Props to the Chargers teamwork guy. Really appreciate it, because he saved me from a lot of embarrassment if I hadn't embarrassed myself enough already at that moment. But yeah, Cameron Dicker's accurate. I wouldn't be surprised if he saw me walking there and then be like, look at this idiot. I'm just going to go duck hunt status right here and just cut one off his head.
Tons of fun. And, Chargers are currently at practice now for day 2 of pads. So we'll have some recaps for you on that one coming up. But, again, it's a process. And Jim Harbaugh talks about the glide, right? They're taking off. They're going slow. They go up nice and easy. And all of a sudden, take off. They're not there yet. But all things are pointing in the right direction. Most things. The scare of Rashawn Slater seems to be a thing of the past. It looks like this team is being extra abundance of caution, he uses the term, to make sure that these guys stay safe with the goal of being healthy for week 1. And we'll be here every step of the way as we continue on our training camp kind of takeaways and recaps. Jake, anything else you want to tell our great friends before we get out of here?
Just some side notes from yesterday. You had 3 pass breakups, one from Deion Henley, one from Tarheeb Still, and one from Tony Jefferson. So it's good to see 2 newcomers, one being a veteran, one being a rookie, already still making those type of impact plays, as both of those guys have had those type of plays take place in camp last week during week 1. So it's good to see. It's good to see as it relates to this team. Again, as Dan said, the glide, as Jim Harbaugh likes to put it, you keep stacking bricks, as Steve Clinkscale likes to say. It's a process. It's a process. It's a process. In terms of just the atmosphere and what we've been able to witness from this coaching staff and what we've been able to actually see them do on the field, this is the biggest, I guess, eyewitness situation where you could say to yourself that term, it feels different, is right there in front of your face.
Yeah.
There's still no music. You can hear everything that the coaches are saying, whether it's in individual drills that they're running with each of their particular groups, what down it is in 7-on-7s or 11-on-11s, and what type of situation it is. They are taking this extremely seriously, and they are trying to better themselves each day. And it just seems like there is a different tempo and a different vibe that is going on with this group of players and this coaching staff. And damn it to hell, doesn't it feel refreshing to actually say that? Not the garden variety type of, it's a different year. We're 0-0. It's back to square one. Reasons to feel optimistic this year. No, it's not the garden variety feeling that we have felt in the past watching this team. There's something cooking in El Segundo that I think is going to surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, and you mentioned the tempo. Like, that was something I forgot to mention earlier. The tempo that I saw where they were doing no huddle and they were practicing, again, you mentioned no music. You could hear the communications from both offense and defense as they're going through some of these periods where they are racing, going play after play after play. Regardless of if it's out of bounds or incomplete, they are going so fast. The tempo is remarkable. And hearing these sides kind of go at it and try to adjust on the fly and these players running in and out, I haven't seen that before. And I've seen 2-minute drills before, but if it's incomplete or whatever, they can kind of take the time, relax. It was nonstop for multiple sessions. And so I think kind of getting them accustomed to being uncomfortable, it's going to pay off. It's going to pay off. And being able to kind of assess the madness and slow it down, I think it's important. So lots we went over today. I know it's a bit of a long one, but wanted to make sure that we get to all the nuggets that we had. Again, thank you to everyone. It was so much fun. Jake had so many people coming up to us and all the conversations we had about random experiences and firefighters coming up to us saying hi. And it was just, it was a great time. Friday, Saturday was epic. Shout out to the director, by the way. Awesome time with him as well. We saw folks from Guilty as Charged. We saw Bolt Bros. We saw NFL Mike. We saw Senior Snappy with Rivers Lake Yacht Club. The whole 9. There were so many folks out there, and it was just a lot of fun. Anything else, Jake, before we get out of here?
I can't wait to see Jordan McFadden. I can't wait to see it.
Rumbling, stumbling.
Just give him the fullback title right now.
Do you think Ben Mason's gone?
I don't know what to think of, because Ben Mason has been in a rotation at fullback in there.
Kind of.
But the that was my point of asking Jim Harbaugh that question when we were there on Saturday, because we heard about it early days of camp before you and I were even down there, that they were putting him in at fullback, which he played a couple snaps that during the regular season last year. So I like how they were essentially, ripping a little bit off of that in jumbo packages, goal line drills. Give me someone the size of Jordan McFadden that's going to help move the line and plow over people. And then we heard on day 2, Greg Roman's talking about, we're going to have him have him take a few reps even at tight end. Like, what? Are you kidding me? And then I'm on the backside of the field while they're on 11-on-11 drills. And I'm looking at Josh Palmer at wide receiver. And then literally just out of nowhere, right next to him comes Jordan McFadden. And I'm standing next to Steve Hagelin, and literally simultaneously we're like, wait, what in the hell is this? And Jordan McFadden goes in motion and goes back across the field, and he's ready to just annihilate someone with a block because it was a running play. Just give Jordan McFadden the fullback title, because to see a guy at his size move the way he does at 303 pounds, I thought that maybe, you'd probably take him in, just go in and, maybe lose a few just to get a little bit quicker off the snap. I don't think he needs it. I do not think he needs it based on some of those motion routes that he's running. Could not believe it. It was like the best thing possible to see. It was absolutely amazing.
Again, I honestly, imagine being a defender with Jordan McFadden coming off in motion.
Get out of the way.
And he's looking at you.
Get out of the way.
We will be in attendance at camp this week, so we'll look forward to seeing more people out there. Day 2, we'll have recap for you probably tomorrow, and then day 3 of pads, and day 4 and everything else we'll have covered for you. Until then, you can find Jake Hefner at Jake T. Hefner on X, myself at Dan W Sports. For Jake Hefner, I'm Dan Wolkenstein. This is the Chargers Unleashed. We'll talk to you next time. Chargers Unleashed.